welcome to your weekly program, Bilahdan, the show that is really building an empire here in the Twin Cities. We're talking about the ramification of the war in Iraq and how this affects the international relation and the role of America in international affair. We have Dr. Ahmed Samatar. He is a professor and Dean of International Study at Macalester. And also we have Mazhar Zobi. He's a doctoral student at the University of Minnesota. And will also be joining with Isam. We're going to talk about the role that America is playing now in a historical perspective. Is American is a rising superpower or a rising empire or a declining empire? How the war in Iraq affects the Americans and its role in international affairs. So don't go away. Salah be with you in a minute. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.
Once in a while, I like to dig in deep in my old library of music to show something that's just almost like not available these days. I have a recording for Abdul Halim Hafiz, a legend Egyptian singer that performed from probably early 70s until early 80s. He died really young. He died at the age of 50 or maybe 45 or 50. He was pretty ill most of his life. And that was the period where musicians knew that people are going to be judging the song and merit of the music and the singing and performance. There was no video clips those days or dancing or anything that would probably add or take from the song. The song it's called Ay Damat Huzn. Means not even a tear for sadness. Performed early 80s actually, and something also those days he always performed with a huge orchestra, and it was the time that they were starting to add some Western instruments like a synthesizer, electric guitar, accordion. All these things really weren't much in the Arabic music until late 60s, early 70s. It's a great performance for Abdul Halim Hafiz. This is the last verse. The song is almost about an hour in live performance. This is the last verse of it. Ay Damat Huzni La and Abdul Halim Hafiz.
Welcome back to Balahdan. I hope you enjoyed that piece. Abd Halim Hawaz, our favorite. I think that this song probably he did it after he died. I mean, the guy looks horrible. But anyway, we're talking about the ramification of the war on Iraq and the new role of the American. Is it an empire in declining or empire in rising? And we have Dr. Ahmed Samatar. He's a professor and a dean of international study at Macalester, and we have Mazhar Zobi. He is a doctor student at the University of Minnesota. We also have our regular analyst, Islam Abdullah. Welcome all to Balahdan, and Balahdan, as you all know, means with open arms. That's really, and you know, a lot of debate now, is taking place about the role of Americans and how the war in Iraq and war in Iraq, whatever you want to say it, it really kind of emphasized the American role as an empire, as a superpower. Is it in declining? Can it do it alone? And all those. Let's start with Dr. Samatar and tell us a little bit the ramification of the war in Iraq and go it alone and the United Nations and debate between European and the Americans and on all this and giving us the historical perspective of that role of American and international affairs.
Right. Well, the ramifications I think can be seen at different levels.
Okay.
One immediate ramification on the war on Iraq is, of course, the change of regime that has taken place. What will come after it is still uncertain. So that is one important ramification, and therefore it means the legitimation, at least in the eyes of the American administration, that it can go into other parts of the world, that it conceives of places that need to be changed because they are not in the interest of the United States particularly, but perhaps later on then attached to that might be the interest of the people in that society. But the emboldenment that comes along, if this becomes successful, that you can do the same thing in other parts of the world.
Building a model for...
That's right, that's right. Now, the deeper consequences, though, is whether the Iraqi people will accept that kind of an occupation for a long time, and we already see the resistance. And two, whether that can become a successful strategy for America's international relations. My short answer to the latter would be, I don't think so. I think in the end it's going to be disastrous.
And how when you say come as a disaster, to whom?
Well, disasters even for the United States itself. There was recently, I think it came out yesterday. If you look at the New York Times, you will note this. President Bush commissioned a group of Americans, some of them scholars, including Arab Americans, to do a quick survey of the Arab and Islamic world. And to find out what the perceptions of those communities are relative to the United States in the wake, particularly of Iraq. And what we find out in this, and it is now public knowledge, is an enormous concentration of respect for American people and the accomplishment of American technology and science. But at the same time, enormous contempt and hate for American foreign policy, particularly as it relates to the Arab world, and more specifically as it relates to the Palestinian people. This is across the Islamic world, that kind of an antipathy. And I think the Iraq situation compounds that. And therefore, even if the United States was militarily capable of doing this kind of a thing everywhere, I think in the final analysis, it's a dead end for the cultivation of legitimacy of American leadership in the world.
I actually just wanted to follow up with a point. What would have been interesting to hear from that commission in particular, I listened to the very same thing yesterday, is to find out whether the perception of the United States is any different in the rest of the world, and which is not available because when they set it up precisely in that framework, which is the United States and the Muslim world, of course it became convenient. I would argue the United States image in the world is not that much better than that of the rest of the world.
Post-Iraq?
Yes.
Well, there has always been this kind of love-hate that goes up. It's not something inherently all the time, but it goes ups and down. Let's talk about in the context of the war in Iraq, and how does prove that someone saying there is no, the idea of having a new empire and or exercise you elicit imperialistic behavior in international affairs is no longer valid, is no longer possible, of the sheer fact the world is becoming so complicated and so big that you have just one empire. What you're going to have, you have different empire or different superpowers, and that's what you can. That's what you found. What you saw the kind of the war that underneath this war between the European and the Americans.
So, I mean, certainly the United States' interest in the Middle East proved that it's not as convenient as it ought to be for empires to stay empires. But the relevant question, I think, with regard to the discussion on empire, is that whether new empires are in need to employ the old imperialistic tendencies.
Which is what? The military?
To occupy another country. Since perhaps the late 80s, beginning the end of the Soviet empire, as it's called, there's been a discussion that the new tendency in empires is to actually export their values, but not their forces, and in essence have those who are colonized to act on behalf of those who are in the center, namely the empire.
Do we have a model for that empire that is more attractive than enforcing their values on other people?
One would argue part of the reason why the United States won the Cold War is precisely that. Some have argued that as a matter of fact. But now there is this return of space occupation as the only source to supply the center being the north or the west, that is. And in that sense, there's a need to kind of, attract that question from that perspective.
Well, we can't talk about the American imperialism or being empire or jumping up in Iraq without acknowledging that here is a regime in Iraq that went on for 30 years. Neither the population in Iraq nor the Arab population in the area were able to modify it, change it, or make it more palatable. 30 years, the Iraqi people suffering under a regime that like which we don't know. So I don't think we should the focus should go on America and imperialism. I don't know what America had in mind of or what her reason is to invade Iraq. God knows what the reasons are. They know it. I don't. But right
now, you can guess.
Now, right now, aren't the Muslims, the Arabs in the area wondering, is it only under an American occupation can an Arab have an elected government? Or the potentials of having an elected government in Iraq is there? Can it be only possible under an American occupation?
Yeah.
This is a question we need to ask.
Right, but I think at least my interpretation of the history of this part of the world and its relationship with powers in the making of the modern world is that European powers, who were in most cases direct colonial projects, have always seen those societies outside of them as places for predation, i.e. places where you go directly or indirectly. Most of colonial projects were direct. And in the process, therefore, you not only corner the resources market of that particular society, but in the process, you also penetrated enough so that the culture and the values of that society begin to see that they are really secondary players in the stage of their own society. Dependent. Now, the American project comes then, it grows out of that, because after all, the establishment of the United States itself is partly based on conquest. And therefore, when the United States comes of age as a global power, it has enormous appetite for its own self-aggrandizement that manifested itself in a variety of ways. The Morno Doctrine in the Atlantic, which makes sure that Europeans do not interfere in the hemisphere of the West, because it is privilege and it is prerogative, is an example of this. And now we come to the other part, our part of the world, and it seems to me that, at least the way I read American interest in the area, and I think some of it is discernible, some of it might be a bit mysterious, but I think some of it is possible to detect.
Yes.
And I think one of them is that this is a very strategic place for the European world, and particularly the United States, and oil is certainly an important part of that. That's one. But this is also a relatively good market, particularly if it is kept in the context of the American interest. Cultural supremacy and the domination through culture. These could be good satellite societies, you see, but not satellite enough so that they will grow up someday and take on their own maturity. But satellite perpetually independent.
Right.
Some was bringing the issue that in the meantime, as American trying to kind of shed their hegemony all over the places with strategic places.
Yeah.
What is the role of the Arab leader or the Arab country or the Muslim countries to respond to that?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what the intention of America as a new empire, whatever you want to call it.
That's right. But I think it is important quickly to make sure that even though we talk about America, and there is America, then internally there are debates. I mean, there are Americans whose values are quite noble, kind, progressive, who give enough thought, sometimes too much thought sometimes, to the welfare of others. So there is a struggle that's always going on in the American political order and cultural order. It is not just so monopolistic. But the tragedy is that those who have had access to power have usually been the ones who want to wrap themselves in the American flag. This kind of an American political correctness that only the American way is the only way to do. And then the progressive Americans get themselves marginalized. So that is one thing we need to understand. And therefore, to answer the question that you have posed, Muslim peoples and Arab peoples need, first of all, of course, to organize their own society, and this disorderly conception of politics and economic and cultural life. It's just such a massive liability that you can't even start to respond to the outside unless you have some legs to stand inside. But as we organize inside and therefore rehabilitate our cultures and economies, which is going to be a major struggle, I'm not suggesting it's easy, that has to be linked then to an understanding of the different elements of American society, and hooking up with that so that you can with Americans to your own side.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the question in essence is really not new. I mean, that question was posed in the 19th century, in the 18th century, and we have termed it as the white man's burden. Precisely, there's a double talk. On the one hand, you talk about self-determination, democracy, and so on and so forth. But when you go to these places, we suggest that they're not capable of that kind of stuff. In essence, the result, that gets reconciled. That kind of dichotomy gets reconciled by what we call colonization, precisely because these people are incapable of generating their own political will. That's the place we call Iraq now.
You talk about a lot of Americans that have the goodwill, and they really feel that the Americans doing good for the world or for other people. How were those elites that they are controlling the power in the American empire or whatever, were able to control the public
in the United States?
In the United States.
Yeah.
By voluntarily people believing we are, even when, obviously we went to Iraq, obviously it's a lot of, go it alone,
Well, I think there are a number of ways perhaps one can respond to this. I mean, there is no question, the great Italian thinker Gramsci has a concept called hegemony. Hegemony, which means the subaltern classes, groups that are at the outside, and the elite are so hooked together that the elite give a great deal of attention to the needs of the subaltern, of those who follow them. And the subaltern see enough of their own interest being protected, and therefore they follow willingly. So to a certain extent, that element existed in the United States. Even the ones who do not vote, we are told, say, the system works anyway. You see. So there is that kind of a legitimacy in this country.
I think, if I may, there is a tendency to exaggerate what America can do or has done or will do.
Well, they are in Iraq. There is no exaggeration there.
I'm saying let's look at the globe as a whole. Let's look at the Chinese. Let's look at the Japanese. Let's look at South Korea. These are societies that came out of the ashes, okay? And somehow, as Dr. Samatar suggested, they got their act together. They They hooked with the right maybe economic forces. They hooked maybe with the right intellectual forces, and they made something for themselves. In spite of America, I don't think it is in America's interest that China succeed and really dominate. It's not in America's interest for Japan to become a superior power either. But still, Japan managed to become a power. Okay, so what I'm saying, we tend to pay too much attention to what America wants, what is America thinking, and what's America plotting, and we fail to look inside. What are we doing for ourselves?
Edward Said, the great
passed away
scholar and thinker, made a point quite a while ago about the role of excellence and investment in excellence in the rehabilitation of culture and society and the construction of a base for greater power. And he suggested, he bemoaned the absence of investment in excellence in the Arab world, and in many other, in the African world is the same. And that kind of a self-debilitation, in a way closes any opportunities, either in terms of the mining of your own history and culture to inspire yourself to do more. And there's plenty of good examples in the Arab world if we can dig enough to show that kind of excellence. But at the same time, it also handicaps for one to respond effectively to the forces of disrespect, to the forces of conquest, and to the forces that want you also always to become dependent and a marginal person. You can't respond otherwise.
When you want to compare, we'll talk about, we're paying a lot of attention to America because obviously they are the only superpower we have, but there is an argument there. Superpower cannot sustain their superiority based on military alone. They have to have ideologically, culture, and also economically. And you can see that in Iraq, they couldn't do it. Even the new conservatives thought they could do it alone and do it without the United Nations, without all the Europe. They found out they cannot do it alone, and they need money, they need support of so many people. Doesn't that tell us, as you can see, even Europeans now try to toy with the idea. American cannot be the sole superpower. We also need to be a player.
Right. Historians tell us many things, and among them is that almost no empire was always defeated from the outside. Empires always fall from the inside. And no empire can rule without persuasion. It's been suggested to me that the British Empire in India ruled with something like 300 people. Yes. We're talking about a country like India, simply because they have convinced the Indians that they need to be colonized. And that's the travesty. As to whether the United States is beginning to sort of initiate a new form of empire, it's not clear. It's not clear that they could sustain this kind of power without the cooperation of either the Iraqis, the Europeans, and many other people. Right away after George Bush took office, he pulled out of literally 7 treaties, if I recall right, and became evident that he couldn't sustain a particular kind of political universal persuasion without the cooperation of others.
I will go further, in fact, I agree with you, will go further and suggest that it will be the greatest folly for this country. It might be seductive to think that you can rule the world, but it's a great folly. And it's a great folly because even economically, first of all, it just is not tenable. We know now just the occupation of Iraq is busting the budget of the United States. And therefore we have to cut programs and we have to get into marginalizing communities in the United States and on and on and on to be able to support the war effort and the conquest in Iraq. One country running the world and maybe being involved in 3 or 4 major wars simultaneously is madness, you see, for this country. But then on top of that, so you cannot sustain it materially. Then on top of that, the question of making other people accept you. Persuasion is a big challenge. So I think any American who thinks that you can build a kind of a superpower that's command the world without any kind of consequences, it's a folly.
So what do we have now?
Well, we have an attempt, one attempt, but that attempt is already beginning to show very serious limitations and cracks.
But American, through history, it was perceived as always part of a solution, you know, World War I, World War II, the Hitler, Japan, Germany. Now, a lot of people perceive it as a part of the problem.
But I mean, what I know also, I have to look at the other side of this. What's so regrettable is why isn't the Arab bloc or the Arab nation, why isn't the Islamic nation, why isn't the international community as interested in the success of Iraq as America is? I mean, America would succeed if Iraq...
What kind of success?
If Iraq is stabilized, if they have an elected government, if they have a functioning economy. But you get the feeling that the rest of the world is sitting back there and enjoying to see America fail or hoping America fail. And that's very regrettable. Why isn't the rest of the world interested in Iraq succeeding?
I don't think I'm not sure if that's the proper way to frame it, of us on them and the United States. The United States made a choice to go and invade a country based on its political might and its military might and based on its own isolationist ideology. They are basically paying the price for it. But I wanted to say that the Islamic world, the Arab world, is not a homogeneous place. And out of all the experiments the United States intervened in the last 30 years, 2 have succeeded, and about 11 have actually fallen out of grace.
And I have to succeed of finishing that. I'm sure we're going to have another one, but I really appreciate this wonderful point you brought here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Assam. And that concludes our show, and I think we have an empire right here, a new empire on the set here. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Evening with blues pianist and vocalist Marcia Ball, Saturday.